Hello, greetings and good morning, and welcome to Archaeology Towers on a rather strange day. Today is the day after the President-elect Donald Trump was announced. And over in America, I know people are very surprised by this result. Whether they wanted Trump to be president or not, there is a prevailing sense of shock and surprise, and in some quarters despair, in some quarters elation. Um, and indeed globally, here in the UK and across the world, these elections are important. They have an impact on how lots of people live, and indeed the prevailing political narrative. So across the world, people are feeling this. There is a prevailing mood. But this mood, oddly enough, is one which I'm already quite familiar with. In fact, I think lots of people in the UK are already quite familiar with. And that is because back in June, we had a very similar set of emotions occur when people voted with a just about majority to leave the European Union. The decision was just as momentous, the narrative was just as strong, and the feelings, the vitriol, was just as potent. And the next day, indeed, for the following few months, people have been trying to figure out how they live together and how they move forward with this prevailing mood somehow on their backs, like a miasma, a cloud surrounding them. Now, why am I talking about this? I'm an archaeologist. Archaeosoup is an archaeological and historical education endeavour. Why am I talking about this? Well, I'm talking about it because I cannot help but have a long view of these events, and I cannot help but see patterns and have ideas that I think are very important. And I wanted to share them with you and encourage you, in fact, to share similar ideas with other people who you know, because I think this stuff is very important. You see, since 2007 and 2008, essentially when I graduated from university, the world has been in crisis. The banking crisis hit in particular, the so-called credit crunch. And this really led to a prevailing political narrative which is driven essentially by stuff. Who has stuff and who doesn't have stuff? Oh, that politician has more stuff than me, and I'm a normal person. Grr. Oh, that immigrant looks like they've got stuff. I want stuff. Because we were so aware that we had less money and less stuff, stuff became the focus. Whether it was fiscal policy, whether it was the money in your own pocket, or whether it was the perception of the efficacy of foreign aid money, stuff has been driving the political narrative for the past almost decade now. And the thing is, stuff is very closely linked with place, because stuff has to be stored somewhere. And place is closely linked with identity and nationalism and essentially us and them. And this is where I see an all too familiar pattern emerging, and one which I think archaeologists have a duty to try and challenge, or at the very least give a better context to. This pattern is as old as the hills themselves. It's certainly as old as the fields on those hills. As soon as we started farming, we started claiming land and started stamping our identity on the landscape. When we had monuments built in which we put the communal dead, and we could point to that community and say, we've always farmed here, bugger off, this is ours. This is literally one of the oldest struggles of humanity. And in the US election, in the EU referendum debate, the ugliest parts of this narrative, the ugliest, most divisive, and frankly most untrue elements came to the fore. Now, I want to stress once more that I'm trying to put party politics to one side. In or out of Europe, Hillary or Donald, it doesn't matter at this point. Those questions have been resolutely answered, and we're living with the fallout today. But I want to try and examine and encourage you to examine the fact that the debate surrounding these very important questions has been reduced down to the simplest of answers. And these simple answers appeal to our perception, essentially, of the past. I suppose what I'm getting at is that those ancient narratives of this is our place, our land, our stuff, really drives a quick response and a quick answer from politicians when it comes to huge questions that really deserve much more nuanced answers, much more nuanced understandings. For example, one of the biggest questions of our age at the moment is what do we do about the mass movement, the huge, species significant movement of people, millions of people across the world who are being displaced by war, famine, conflict, horrendous political regimes or religious ideology in their parts of, for example, in parts of Africa or the Middle East. What do we do about that? Now, instead of having a proper understanding of this stuff and a discussion which is productive and isn't tribal in its nature, people want and politicians give a simple response, essentially boiling down to, well, this is our stuff, this is our land, we no. and that's it. That's where the discussion ends. Now, once again, why am I talking about this? I'm an archaeologist. I'm talking about it because I can't help but think that the current simple responses to these questions are driven by a misunderstanding, a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually these ancient narratives mean. Yes, they have resulted in nation states, but nation states have only been around for a couple of hundred years, in a narrative which is 200,000 years long, the length of our time on this planet. These narratives have resulted in ethnicities, but even these aren't that old. Genetic studies, archaeological studies show that, for example, this pale skin that I have really only came about in the past 10,000 years of history in Europe. And before then, people looked much more, I think the word used in the study was swarthy, essentially much more Mediterranean, if not African, in terms of skin colour. Yes, these narratives have resulted in strong linguistic, cultural, and ideological and philosophical views of the world, which are fundamentally at odds in so many places, and especially when they're forced to live in the same place next to each other. But archaeology shows us that this is not remotely new. Archaeologists find what is new about the past. And for example, recently we showed that Chinese skeletons are being found in Roman London. Phoenician mathematicians are being found in medieval Japan. People from in the Bronze Age, from what is now Tel Aviv or thereabouts, were travelling to Cornwall to get tin. The narrative which people base current political and current ideological discussions on is flawed. And I think this is the highest possible calling of archaeology, if you'll allow me to be so bold, is to provide a true and proper context for the discussions which do change the world that we live in today, whether it's discussions surrounding the environment or an election or sexuality or international trade or local multiculturalism and problems therein. None of this stuff is outside the bounds of archaeology, and it is constantly being modified by our discoveries. The context that we can give modern life is so rich and so broad that it directly challenges these simple and small answers to very complex questions. Us and them, this stuff, their stuff, get away. It's not that simple, and I really think that archaeologists should be challenging it. Now, there is something else going on here as well, and that is the fact that people have to be receptive to more complex answers and more nuanced discussion in their everyday life. And for the most part, people either don't have time for that, or at least they don't think they have time for it, or they haven't been exposed to it. Some people would go so far as to say, well, there's lots of stupid people out there, but that's not the case. It's more often than not the case that people simply haven't been given the tools to reanalyze and reassess these questions and to come to their own conclusions, as opposed to being fed a simple political narrative. To put, I suppose a case point would be my ongoing interest in Celtic identity. The reason why I tackled that in a video not that long ago, which continues to get extremely interesting video comments and discussion and debate, is because it was a case study that goes to the heart of this very question, and that is how people interact with the past, how they interact with their own identity, and how all of this stuff is both difficult, fascinating, challenging, and sometimes painful to talk about. Now, this has exposed me to the fact that some people just don't want to know. They do not want to be challenged. But for the most part, I think people are interested. When given the tools to have a think about something, they are, in fact, interested. And this surely has to be another role of the archaeologist in modern life, and the historian, and the sociologist, and so many other humanities-linked and scientific endeavours, is to allow people the context to have an inquiring mind. If they choose not to think, if they choose to ignore it, if they choose just to go down the road of accepting post-truth politics and downright lies, because it sounds like he's speaking the truth, he talks like my friend in the pub, fine, that's okay. But at the very least, we should be giving people the context and the tools to make use of if they so choose. And this is something which I have been doing, which I will continue to do in the coming years. But I would encourage you guys, especially if you're an archaeologist or a student or an older, a person who's got a passion or an interest in this stuff, I would encourage you to do the same. Don't let people have simple answers to complex questions. Allow people to ask you questions if they want to. Challenge modern assumptions about why the world is the way it is and what has to happen next. Because that is precisely what all of this is about. All of everything I do, everything that archaeologists should be doing, is not just about filling in the gaps, filling in some sort of family photo album in the past. It's actually about finding, as I say, what is new about the past, so that we can challenge, well, our assumptions about the present, and therefore our direction into the future. Now, I'm not going to keep on ranting on about this. I do feel very strongly about this, and I'm trying to remain nice and calm. But I just wanted to highlight some thoughts and encourage you guys to have a think, and also try and put out a sort of, I suppose, a manifesto for the role of archaeology right now, at a time when our understanding of who we are and what that means geopolitically is so important. I think we cannot afford to have anything less than a high debate about, and a high understanding and a high level discussion about what the past is and how we have got to this place right here, right now. Now, to that end, on Archaeo Soup, you'll notice that, for example, I've started trying to share for example, a lovely link of the day. I'm not allowing myself to be drawn down and pulled down by negative narratives. I'm also I'm trying to reassess at the moment how it is that we tackle news stories about, for example, archaeology, and how we help to discuss that and interpret it and its context for modern life. This has been a bit difficult for me in the past couple of months, because I've been very, very, very busy, and I'm trying to find a way to work and move forward. But it is something which I continue to reassess, and which I continue to redouble my efforts towards, is the understanding of everything, all this stuff, and how important it is. And I would encourage you guys to do the same. Essentially, simple answers are rarely right, and they're almost never interesting. And if nothing else, archaeology and history is one of the most important sources of the context of truth. I wouldn't say truth, but the context of truth. It provides the broadest context through which we can find our truth today. And I simply want to highlight that I intend to continue delivering that, and I would encourage you guys to deliver it in your personal lives and indeed more broadly if you can. This is not the time to be retreating to our books and our laboratories. This is the time to be speaking up for what we know, talking about why it's interesting, and highlighting why this stuff can help us make better decisions in the world around us today. Again, party politics to one side. That stuff doesn't matter. I'm more interested in what happens next. Which is ironic for an archaeologist, I guess. Anyway, guys, I don't want to keep on rambling on about this. I just thought I'd share some thoughts, and do let me know what you think down below. As ever, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.